Iraq, 2003. The U.S. invades, the regime collapses, and within months, oil production is restructured not by Baghdad, but by Halliburton and ExxonMobil, the money. Routed through offshore accounts, IMF advisors, and contractor deals. Now fast forward. Venezuela, 2026. No invasion, just sanctions, seizures, and a headline. U.S. sells $500 million of Venezuela's oil. With more sales to come, 3250 million barrels, according to Trump officials, and the cash. It's not going to Caracas. It's locked in offshore escrow controlled by Washington, pending democratic conditions. Sound familiar? Because here's what's happening. The same model that followed regime change in Iraq is now playing out in Venezuela, only this time, no tanks needed. Just asset forfeiture, energy contracts, and financial leverage. And if early reports are accurate, the total revenue involved over the next 5 years could hit trillions when you count oil, infrastructure, debt settlements, and foreign investment. So here's the real question. Is this a partnership or a resource transfer with better PR? In this video, I'll show you the four-part pattern that connects Iraq 2003 to Venezuela today. Because while the flags are different, the mechanism? Identical. To see the pattern, you have to understand the setup. In early 2026, the U.S. launched Operation Southern Spear. Officially, it was about narco-trafficking and human rights. Unofficially, it was about oil. Maduro, Venezuela's president, was captured. Dozens of tankers linked to Venezuela's state oil company were seized. And just like that, the United States declared effective control over the country's most valuable asset, its crude. Now here's the kicker. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, over 300 billion barrels, more than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran. And overnight, Washington was in charge of selling it. A few weeks later, the first deal went through, $500 million in oil sold with more sales on the way, totaling up to 50 million barrels. But instead of flowing back to Venezuela, the money went offshore, to escrow accounts controlled by the U.S. Treasury, out of reach. Now pause and rewind. Iraq, 2003. After the fall of Saddam, the U.S. and its allies didn't just rebuild Iraq. They restructured its entire oil industry. Foreign companies like ExxonMobil, BP, and Halliburton were handed contracts. Revenue flowed into international accounts, and Iraqis, though nominally in charge, had to get budget approval from outside. The tools were different. The goals were the same. Control the oil, control the cash. Then manage the recovery on your terms. Sound familiar? Because that's where this story is heading. And it's not just history rhyming. It's a template being copied. Let's talk about how this was done cleanly, legally, and fast. After Maduro's capture, the U.S. didn't need military bases or resolutions. They had something more effective, civil asset forfeiture law. Using that, the U.S. labeled Venezuela's oil tankers as criminal assets based on alleged corruption, trafficking, and misuse of sovereign funds. Then they seized them, dozens of ships, hundreds of millions in crude, just reflagged. Once seized, the oil wasn't just stored, it was sold. And here's the legal trick. The U.S. didn't need to prove ownership. They only had to claim the original sales were invalid because they came from a non-legitimate regime, which they had just arrested. And so, by circular logic, the U.S. became the seller of oil it never bought and the self-appointed custodian of the profits. Those profits? Not returned to Venezuela. Instead, routed to bank accounts in Qatar, a neutral financial zone that allowed Washington to avoid lawsuits, international claims, or creditor seizures. If that sounds familiar, it should, because in 2003, the Development Fund for Iraq was created to manage oil revenues, officially overseen by the UN but in practice, controlled by the U.S.-led Coalition Provisional Authority. Money flowed into offshore accounts. Reconstruction was coordinated by foreign contractors, and Iraqi officials had little say in how their own oil money was spent. Now swap Iraq for Venezuela. Swap 2003 for 2026. And the mechanism is almost identical. It's not occupation. It's custodianship with contracts, the moment. The tankers were seized. The pipeline didn't stop. It just changed hands. Instead of oil flowing out of Venezuela under PDVSA contracts, it now moved under U.S. oversight, sold to carefully selected buyers, likely American or Western-aligned trading houses. And here's the important bit. It wasn't auctioned. It wasn't open market. The sales happened quietly. Prices weren't disclosed, but insiders say the barrels were moved at a discount, distressed cargo pricing. From there, the oil hit Gulf Coast refineries, got blended, shipped, re-exported. The supply chain didn't skip a beat, and the money? Straight into offshore escrow, not controlled by Caracas, not managed by Venezuela's national oil company. but overseen by U.S. Treasury intermediaries operating through neutral banks in Qatar. Why Qatar? Because it's offshore enough to avoid litigation, but close enough to Western finance to maintain full control. This isn't new. Back in Iraq, the Development Fund for Iraq was supposedly set up to rebuild the country, but the oversight structure routed all decisions through Washington. Contractors submitted bids, funds were released in phases, the recovery was monetized by firms already lined up before the first barrel moved. Venezuela's heading down the same path. Chevron and Halliburton are already in discussions to invest up to $100 billion in Venezuelan energy infrastructure. But they're not negotiating with Venezuela. They're talking to U.S.-approved administrators. So the pattern is clear. Seize the supply, redirect the flow, control the cash, then sell the reconstruction on your terms. Here's where the math gets wild. The U.S. has already completed its first $500 million oil sale from seized Venezuelan crude. And that's just the beginning. Officials have floated plans to move 250 million barrels in the coming year. That's billions in revenue. And over a multi-year recovery timeline, the full value of transferred control across oil, infrastructure, debt relief, and foreign investment could approach trillions. But here's the catch. None of it touches Venezuelan hands without American approval. Every dollar from those sales sits in escrow. And while the funds are technically Venezuelan, access is conditional. Conditions written, reviewed, and enforced by Washington. The current transitional government doesn't control spending. They don't decide on disbursement. They don't even handle contract negotiations with oil majors. That all happens through vetted intermediaries, gatekeepers. Same thing happened in Iraq. Billions in oil revenue were collected post-invasion. But the funds were released through programs and contractors chosen by the U.S. hospitals, roads, even water systems built by foreign firms, priced in dollars, secured through U.S. banks. In both cases, the public narrative was reconstruction, but the real function? Cash flow containment. The original owners Venezuelans, Iraqis lost not just their leaders, but their liquidity, no national control. No fiscal autonomy, no real budget, just a seat at the press conference. And none at the Treasury. So yes, technically the money exists, but until it's released without conditions? It's not ownership, it's hostage finance. Let's follow the winners. Start with Venezuela. The first $500 million oil sale didn't go to Caracas. It went to offshore accounts, but in between, somebody made money. Traders bought distressed Venezuelan crude at below market rates, no competition, no headlines. Refiners got cheap input oil, logistics firms handled sanctioned cargo with premium margins, and U.S. banks. They cleared the deals, held the money, and skimmed transaction fees the whole way through. That's not speculation. That's the standard cut for escrow management. Now rewind to Iraq, 2003. After the regime fell, the oil fields weren't silent for long. Private security firms protected the wells, oil service giants like Halliburton, Schlumberger, and Qatar moved in. The reconstruction economy was born funded by Iraqi oil, paid to foreign firms, billions in contracts, billions in profit, same story. In both cases, the narrative was about stability and rebuilding. But the cash always flowed uphill to the countries doing the restructuring, and who didn't profit? Ordinary citizens. In Iraq, years of conflict followed. Power grids failed, public services collapsed. The money was there, it just didn't land where it was needed. Venezuela's on the same trajectory. Food prices keep rising, blackouts continue, wages are stagnant, and that $500 million? Still frozen. So when they say historic energy partnership, ask this, who's the partner? And who's just watching their wealth walk out the door? The ink wasn't even dry on the first oil deal when the world started reacting. Russia was first. State media called it economic expropriation and warned that no resource-rich nation was safe from lawfare colonization. China followed with a subtler but sharper message. This action undermines global stability in trade and sovereignty. Translation: you just rewrote the rules and we noticed. At the UN, a handful of Latin American states tried to raise the issue of illegal asset transfers, but the resolution stalled. No appetite, no leverage. The market barely blinked. Oil prices dipped, then corrected. Why? Because the barrels weren't new, they were just rerouted. The system adjusted, and Venezuela? Still stuck. The transitional government approved by Washington made all the right noises. They promised transparency, reform, and sovereign control of national resources, but behind the scenes they have zero fiscal power. All oil sales are routed through U.S.-controlled mechanisms. All revenue is held abroad. All spending is subject to conditional release. Meanwhile, on the ground, hospitals are understocked, schools are underfunded, Hyperinflation is creeping back. Sound familiar? After the Iraq invasion, the country's oil flowed, but the economy collapsed into dependency, corruption, and endless aid packages. In both cases, the state didn't die, it was just emptied, and the wealth. It moved quietly, legally, from state control. To offshore custody from public asset. To private opportunity, and the people still waiting for their rescue. So where does Venezuela stand now? Technically, oil production is back, around 850,000 barrels per day, according to U.S. energy officials. That's nearly double what it was before the raid. But almost none of that oil is under Venezuelan control. Every sale goes through a foreign-administered framework. Payments are wired into accounts the transitional. Government can't touch. Contracts are reviewed by American legal teams. And investment deals? Only approved if they align with Washington's strategic goals. The interim government calls it a necessary compromise. They claim it's the only path to stability. But Venezuelan citizens know better. Gas is still expensive. Utilities are failing. Wages haven't moved in months. The economy's technically growing on paper, but only because foreign companies are funneling cash into pre-approved projects, pipelines, ports, and oil field repairs. Meanwhile, the actual cash flow from that $500 million sale? Still frozen. And Chevron, Halliburton, Occidental, they're all getting first picks on contracts to help rebuild. But just like Iraq, rebuilding really means re-entering, locking in sweetheart deals while the nation has no leverage. Even the banks holding Venezuela's money are earning more than the government is. So yes, the oil's flowing again. But the power? That's been rerouted. And Venezuela, like Iraq before it, is learning what it means to be rich in resources, but poor in access. This isn't about Venezuela anymore. It's about the system. Because what we're watching isn't a rescue operation. It's a financial framework, polished, repeatable, and dangerously effective. Here's the 5-step pattern. Step 1. Declare a regime illegitimate. Step 2. Seize national resources under anti-corruption or anti-trafficking laws. Step 3. Sell those resources through approved channels. Step 4. Hold the money offshore under democratic conditions. Step 5. Allow access only through foreign-controlled investment and recovery programs. That's not theory. That's the Venezuela blueprint. That's the Iraq blueprint. And it works because the U.S. still owns the plumbing, dollar-denominated oil, swift banking systems, global escrow management. As long as those three stay in U.S. hands, any sanctioned economy becomes vulnerable. And here's why it's so powerful. 1. It doesn't look like war. No tanks, no soldiers, just memos and wire transfers. 2. It avoids accountability. There's no battle to lose, just court filings to win. 3. It makes everyone else complicit. Energy companies, banks, media, even NGOs. They all benefit from a system that transfers control without the optics of occupation. And once it starts, no one wants to stop it. Not when the oil keeps flowing. Not when the contracts keep paying. Not when the headlines say recovery instead of extraction. This is the new model, geopolitical power backed not by force, but by finance. It's cleaner, it's scalable, and it just moved hundreds of billions, soon to be trillions, without a single shot fired. Let's stop pretending this was just a sale. $500 million in seized oil revenue, rooted offshore, a government with no access to its own cash, foreign companies locking in trillion-dollar recovery deals. That's not a partnership, that's a transfer. So here's the question: if this is legal, if this is praised, and if it works this smoothly, who's next? Drop a comment. Does this look like Iraq 2.0 with better PR? Or is this just what global power looks like now? Because the pattern is working: no occupation, no bombs, just lawyers, bankers, and barrels, and the people who live in these countries? They don't get a vote, they just get the bill. If this episode helped you see the machinery behind modern empire, share it. Not for clicks, for clarity. Next episode, we go to China and Saudi Arabia, where the petro-yuan is no longer a rumor, it's becoming a weapon. And if oil ever breaks free of the US dollar, this whole game changes, because you can't hold oil money hostage if it's not wired in dollars. Stay tuned. All sources used in this episode, Reuters, Time, AP, US Treasury memos, and international contract data, are public and available in the video description. And as always, follow the money.